Preparing to live stream. Oops. All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
We're now live streaming on YouTube, and I just sent you the link, Anu.
Yes, I see it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Okay,
will
we are
post
live
it.
streaming, but we haven't started the meeting yet. So we will just wait until 1:30 to start the meeting.
And until quorum.
Okay, for those who have joined, we are live streaming now to test it. We haven't started the meeting, but we are on live stream. So just please stay muted and we'll be starting momentarily.
Okay, it looks like I've posted a link to Facebook. If any of you are on Facebook, if you go to our account, or if you're on the web, if you just say facebook.com/HiClimate, and see if you can see our link, that would be great.
Well, that should be. Oh, you're right. Yeah. Suzanne, Rick, how are you?
Hi, Rick. Hey, how are you? Rick, we are live streaming now just to get it tested and set up, but we will start the meeting shortly.
Anu, are you there?
I am. I'm just trying to post our links.
Okay, how many members are on the Climate Change Commission currently?
There are 20. We should have 11 for a quorum.
Okay, okay.
Okay, I think we are good and we will start in 1 minute.
Okay. I'm just trying to post our links so people can view them, okay?
Next door.
We're not going to use that after all,
It's not gonna work.
but it will work. Sorry about that. Should be easy fix though.
Okay, are you ready, Anu? Are you all posted?
I'll post it.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and get started. It's 1:30 on May 13th, 2020. Welcome, everyone. This is the Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission. During the COVID-19 emergency, we are conducting our meeting remotely. Thank you all for joining in. Our meeting is live streamed so that members of the public can listen into our meeting. Just a couple of things in terms of how we operate the meeting. We do have a quorum now, so we're going to be able to go ahead. So for those participating, please, if you can, mute your phone when you're not speaking. And then please keep your video on unless you're doing something distracting. You can turn it off momentarily, but otherwise it'd be helpful to keep it on. If you want to speak, you can just go like this and we can call on you. We are going to disable the chat function. And so this is being live streamed now to the public. I think that's it. If you are entering the meeting to testify or to present on an item, we would appreciate it if you would turn your video and audio off until you are ready to present, but the commissioners can keep their video on. We do have a lot of written testimonies. We have got some very thoughtful testimonies. They are posted and they're available publicly. I will say that I will read who they're from as soon as I do roll. So I'm going to do the roll so that people know who's participating. And I'm going to read the names of the people who RSVP'd first, and then we'll see if anyone else is. So first is myself. Mary Alice Evans is here. Rick Freed is here. Brian Hall is here. You can wave so that people know. Representative Nicole Lowen is here. Thank you. Justine Nihipali is here. Phyllis Shimabukuro Geyser, I think she's going to be joining. Michael
Okay,
Yee.
this is Brian Shim. I'm in for
Brian.
Philip.
Okay, Brian Cow. Okay, thank you. Michael Yee. There you go. Okay. Lynn Rocky Regan is here. I saw there. She's wearing her mask. Jeff Dack is here. Tyler Gomes. Tyler Gomes was here. Yes. Hi, Tyler. Brian. Keith Kawaoka. Thank you. Glenn Scott. Thank you. Josh Stanbro. Great. I did see Luke Myers. Luke Myers, yes. Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else whose name I didn't call who is present, who is a commission member? Okay, I think that covers everyone. Thank you so much. The public testimony we've received, I want to acknowledge so everybody knows we've received it. Nathaniel Harmon from Blockchain Solutions Hawaii, Lee Chamberlain, Maui Bicycling League, Dennis Teranishi from PICTER, Pacific International Center for High Technology Research, Angela Huntemer, private citizen, Alexandra Khan, Kahana Foundation, Amy Hennessy, Ulupono Foundation, Terry Skillman, Hawaii Arts Alliance, Robert Pearsall, Citizens Climate Lobby, and Lala Nuss, Regenerative Island Economy. These are all posted online as well as they've been distributed to the commissioners. So thank you very much for your public testimony. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Anu, who is going to do an introduction into the agenda section.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Co-Chair, for being here, taking the time. I will keep this brief because it's an abbreviated meeting. Hello, everyone. I'm Anu Hitchell. I'm the coordinator for this wonderful commission. The focus of this meeting is what is the role of the commission and its work in post-COVID recovery. While the Climate Office has been working on many other projects and initiatives, none seem to be more important than this one. But I do urge you to look in on what we are doing. Our 2 social media accounts on Instagram and Facebook are good windows into this. That's @HighClimate or @High_climate. So our theme today centers around Carpe Pandemicus, or seize the pandemic to make a green recovery. It's not actually a Latin term, I just made it up. So for this discussion, I prepared a briefing document, which you can also find on our website, which is climate.hawaii.gov/commission. You have to scroll down a little bit and you'll find it. I thank the many colleagues who contributed their time, effort, and expertise in developing this brief. We also, as you know, received quite a bit of testimony that supports the role of the commission in the ways that are outlined in this brief and more. So thank you for your engagement and support. So the pandemic crisis highlights how vulnerable Hawaii is to larger forces and why it is imperative to move quickly to a clean, equitable, and resilient future. These are themes that are emphasized by the commission in its mission statement. Economists Nick Stern and Joseph Stiglitz and others have done some new research, which is forthcoming in the Oxford Review of Economic Policy, as to what fiscal policies make the most sense for recovery. They looked at speed of implementation, economic multiplier, and climate impact potential. They surveyed over 200 central bank officials, finance ministry officials, and other economic experts from G20 countries and looked at more than 700 policies. The findings suggest that a post-crisis green stimulus can help drive a superior economic recovery. Basically, that a green stimulus is better than a brown one, even in economic terms. In Hawaii, these findings are also echoed by our local experts. And today we have 3 presenters making a powerful case for moving us ahead, not just back to normal, but to a new and better normal. So the brief outlines what this better normal would look like. And it's a better normal that increases investment in active transportation to create the most jobs fastest, while addressing equity, resilience, and clean energy goals. A better normal keeps the wild wild, increases investment in nature-based solutions to protect our beaches and natural lands, makes us more resilient, less carbon dependent, and creates jobs. A better normal includes a broad-based inclusive process for recovery to create equity, resilience, and strength. Allow me then to present Dr. Kealoha Fox, who was on the Hawaii Feminist COVID-19 response team for the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women. She will talk about their report and the nexus with the Climate Commission's priorities. Welcome, Kealoha, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you, chairs, and thank you to all of the commissioners. As some of you might remember, I am a former commissioner, formerly representing the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. It's nice to be with you all today, and I'm going to share my screen. Anu, I think in the host feature, if you can just turn that on, then I can have the slide deck show simultaneously when I speak.
Got it. Let's work on that.
In the interim, while we wait, the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women worked with more than 30 organizations and more than 40 feminist leaders to create the Hawaii Feminist COVID-19 Response Team. We meet every week, and we are involved in a number of cross-functional activities for government, business, community, nonprofit organizations, and the organizations that we serve. The function is still disabled, so I'll continue for now for the sake of time. Through our work,
Try it now. I think I tried a different setting.
Thank you, Chair. It does work now. How's that for you? Great. So the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women is actually the first state in the US to submit a feminist recovery plan that centers gender and centers a recovery where women and girls are prioritized, and where a recovery is not built on the backs of immigrant women, Native women, Indigenous, Pacific Islanders, COFA migrants. We want to make sure that everyone is accounted for in the type of recovery that we all hope to see in the future that we want to build. I'll start with just the context, right? Where there's clearly a public health emergency, which is really my wheelhouse and expertise, and the nexus of the built environment, the natural environment, with a public health emergency is core to the social determinants of health and is part of the state's priorities codified in HRS 226-20. And so when we look at our report and the publications of Bridges Not Backs, a feminist economic recovery plan in COVID-19, with the intersection of your new drafted brief, A Better Normal Post-COVID-19 Recovery for a Climate-Ready Hawaii, we see a great opportunity and we see great energy for Hawaii to come together to form allyship and to make sure that those recoveries that the state is planning is incorporating many different perspectives that are long overdue. I'll start with this question and pose to you, what would it look like for Hawaii to become a national leader with innovative gender equity job pipeline programs that prioritize green jobs for local residents? Those are the type of conversations we're having in our feminist response team. And I leave that with you today as you look through our documents. I also want to share that we know that there's many and numerous researched and studied climate impacts that impact gender. That, for example, climate change leads to more violence against women and girls. And women play a key role in addressing climate mitigation and adaptation for solutions, especially when you prioritize Indigenous solutions, Native solutions, and Pacific Island resources like we see here in Hawaii. This is not something that our COVID response team is looking at in isolation. In fact, the UN Women says the threats of climate change are not gender neutral. This coming Saturday, the United Nations Foundation will be working with a number of key leaders, including two of Hawaii's most important voices on this issue, Dr. Maxine Burkett and Zelda Keller from the Institute for Climate and Peace and the University of Hawaii at Manoa will be alongside the UN Foundation, Greenpeace, and the World Resources Institute to talk about these same issues that our response team is looking at, but from an international and global perspective. To give you a brief overview of our plan, we anchored our report in 4 fundamental questions that are outlined for you here. And how does the state look and deal at the budgetary restrictions, programmatic changes, and efforts to contain and enhance revenue? We know that the state should support and enhance and stimulate the economy. And we're offering some suggestions and prioritizations of how do we do that once the stay-at-home orders are fully lifted for all counties and for the state. And how do we think about state spending with COVID-19 resources coming into Hawaii that can help Hawaii become more resilient for the future? We make several key recommendations anchored within these questions that you'll find throughout our report. We want to see a feminist COVID-19 response and recovery plan that's adopted and utilized statewide and implemented across different programs in the government, in business, and in the community sectors. We hope that these actions prioritize women and girls, femme and non-binary individuals who do make up the proportion and demographic majority of Hawaii's residents. We want to help contain costs that enhance revenue through innovative solutions, but that also protect the social safety net. We want to make sure that we stimulate Hawaii's economy and that the state looks at options like subsistence living and the perpetuation of land and sea-based practices traditional to Hawaii's ecological and food system, those same conversations that your commission is talking about and that are prioritized within DLNR. We also hope that the federal stimulus funds can include a 20% pro rata share of the COVID-19 response funds in trust for Native Hawaiians expressed for their recovery needs as an important community member, a demographic that Hawaii has a codified commitment to. In so much in the diversification and the reshaping of our economy, we have several examples that we hope that you folks will consider in your own brief and in your own meetings moving forward. For example, what happens when we can support sustainable opportunities such as green jobs, renewable energy, energy efficiency, environmental resource management. However, knowing that gender-based gaps do exist in these industries and women are currently underrepresented in several of these industries and occupations. So ending with several recommendations to the commission today for your folks' consideration. Help us to see a better normal, help us to see an equitable recovery that includes centering equity for women and girls. This should include sustainable and subsistence recovery projects, nature-based solutions, in green jobs where women are not left behind and where girls can be a part of these pipeline programs. Support and share a better normal, the post-COVID-19 recovery for a climate-ready Hawaii brief across your agencies and your departments, and help become champions of other plans that are intersecting these recommendations. Help to be an ally, a partner, and a key collaborator with us across business, community, and other partnerships that are currently in process and currently forming their own plans and briefs right now. So I'll go back to that question from the beginning of what would it look like for Hawaii to be a national leader and innovate around gender equity job pipeline programs. Well, the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women is doing just that with DLIR. They're creating a formal collaboration to build this pipeline program right here in Hawaii for us. So let us all think together in this gender equity job pipeline, what types of green jobs would you like to see? How can the commission work to create visibility and support for these new programs across sectors? If you maybe missed it, we had this same conversation in a virtual town hall with our own senator and feminist leader, Senator Mazie Hirono. This is on Senator Hirono's Facebook page. You can watch our conversation with her where she shares the prioritization of many of these same conversations we're having in our COVID-19 feminist response team, and that you've included in your brief as well. Please save the date for part 3 of our forum series next week with Bye Collective on Tuesday 19th at 9 a.m. We'll be having a centered conversation for equity and justice for all of Hawaii, and we hope that you will join us and share with your staff as well. We have great opportunities for them to join the conversation. We have hundreds of people engaging with us right now locally, and many more around the country and around the world. If you have any more questions, I would direct and urge you to reach out to the executive director of the commission, Cara, and this is her information here. The full report can be found on the Department of Human Services website, and it's able for you to share and use and reference going forward. Thank you so much for including us in your portion of the agenda today. And if you have any questions, do let us know. We're looking forward to this just and equitable future for all of Hawaii, along with you all. Aloha and mahalo.
Thank you so much, Kealoha, for that very thoughtful presentation and the reminder that the importance of rebuilding our economy and society post-COVID-19 is a key, equitable portion is a key element of that, very parallel and embedded in our climate change solutions for mitigation and adaptation. So thank you for that. All right, we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Anybody have any questions on this topic for Kealoha? Questions or comments? If you want to say anything, you can just raise your hand, or you can just turn off your mute button and go ahead and speak. Okay, hearing none, I think we can move on. Thank you so much for joining us, Kealoha. And I want to point everybody to our public testimony online for further thoughts on this. Thank you so much. Okay, Anu, you want to introduce our next presenter?
Sure. Thank you. And I just wanted to mention that our public testimony is also on climate.hawaii.gov/commission. So thank you very much for that presentation, Kealoha. For our next speaker, so I noticed one of the testimonies stated that current shovel-ready capital improvement proposals dedicated only $35 million out of $700 million for active transportation in Hawaii. So with Beth Osborne's emphasis on jobs, recovery, and transportation, I welcome her as our next speaker. Beth Osborne is Director of Transportation for America, and though based in Washington, D.C., she is a familiar name here in Hawaii. She has worked with departments in Hawaii, particularly with Hawaii Department of Transportation. Welcome, Beth, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate you all participating in a conversation about this and asking all these questions. They are definitely the right questions. I am now going to try to share my screen. Here we go. And I'll give you a prettier view. Okay, so a little bit about my organization, Transportation for America. We are a national nonprofit that is focused on creating a transportation system that connects people to jobs and opportunity through multiple means of travel, no matter their personal economic means or their physical ability to move around. We do this work through research and analysis of how the current transportation system is functioning. We also do this work through direct technical assistance, which I've gotten to participate in Hawaii, and through advocacy at all levels of government, though we are most known for our advocacy at the federal level. When we're talking about transportation and climate, We're talking about these 5 areas, which most of the focus goes to the top 3, mostly the top 2, really, fuel switching and fuel economy. Where I spend most of my time are the bottom 2, reducing travel demand and reducing, increasing building on the fringe of town. What I find also that's very interesting is while we in government, and I do say we because I've spent almost my entire career in government, and I just can't get the we out of my system. What we in government tend to do when we're thinking about transportation and climate is spend a lot of time thinking about how our partners in private industry or the users of our system could do their job better. Where we tend to struggle is the parts that we have jurisdiction over. We often leave them out completely. We find that it's very hard to reform our own practices, and we don't spend a ton of time in this area. But this is where I spend all my time. Some of the things that we work on in reducing travel demand and building on the fringe, I'm very much focusing on the travel demand side here, is creating frequent, connected, safe transit that goes where people want to go. That last phrase sounds obvious, but when you study the way people evaluate transit, we often talk about how many people have access to transit service or stops, but we don't ask whether or not that transit service runs when people need it to run, or whether or not it goes to the places they need to go. And there's some reasons for that that we'll get into. We focus on updating roadway design standards so that we can support safety of movement, especially for people who are not in their cars, over speed, which is the default position in most transportation projects. We look at considering how well transportation connects people to jobs and services, which used to be it's always been considered the gold standard. You can find literature in academia writing about this as far back as the 1950s, but we didn't have the technology to do it. Now we use the technology we need in these handy dandy little smartphones all the time. We just haven't brought it into our land use or our transportation work. The fourth is building the things people need to access closer to where they live, which sounds, again, obvious, but a lot of our development regulations don't permit it. And simply measuring and reporting on the impact of government regulation and investments on greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I'm going to translate or transfer now into a conversation about what's going on right now on the ground during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think the simple one-line description is COVID-19 is exposing how poor a job we have done in our community design and transportation system in addressing climate, equity, safety, public health, and quality of life. One of the things that has been getting a lot of coverage lately is how COVID-19 has exposed long-term inequities in the way we build communities and our transportation system. My partners over at the Union of Concerned Scientists recently put together a bunch of reports that talk about how communities near highways have more fine particle pollution. People of color are more likely to live in exposed communities, and COVID-19 mortality is linked to long-term fine particle exposure. To give a little bit more information on this, a little more detail, Harvard has just completed a preliminary study that shows that even extremely small levels of long-term exposure to PM 2.5 is associated with an increase in mortality from COVID-19. In fact, they found 1 microgram per cubic meter is associated with a 15% increase in mortality from COVID-19. They also put together a ton of information that shows that busy roads next to communities tend to be where the highest exposure to PM 2.5 is, and that it is communities of color that are much more likely to be along those polluting corridors. In fact, in the cleanest areas of the country, white Americans make up 74% of the population, while they're only 62% of the population as a whole. And in the areas that are more polluted, 61% of people tend to be people of color. Second is safety. This is getting a lot of coverage. Just in the last week, I've seen it. The graph on the left is actually from Maui, comparing the recent time period to the same time period over 2019. It shows what an increase in speeding on our roadways has occurred. I'm particularly struck by the Washington Post article. The quote I have there is from an engineer and transportation official in Minnesota. One of the things that I didn't put in the slide is his quote that says, "We're getting reports every week of dozens of drivers being cited for traveling over 100 miles per hour. That's just insanity on our roadways," said Michael Hansen, director of the Office of Traffic Safety in Minnesota, where 42 people were killed in traffic collisions in the first 45 days after the state's March 16 stay-at-home order was in effect. By comparison, 29 people were killed on Minnesota highways during the same period in 2019. Now, to some extent, this is due to there not being traffic, but a big part of this is without the traffic to modify the way people would naturally behave on the roadways, they're reacting to the design. And the way we design our roadways is to be straight and wide so that people feel like they should go fast and they behave exactly as the design instructs them to. People are extremely sensitive to design cues, and we refuse in this country to recognize those design flaws. Another thing that, and this is both a flaw that's been exposed, but also an opportunity to really change the way we think about transportation. It has become incredibly clear how essential transit is to keeping our healthcare system and our supply chain running. Those who are considered essential workers during the COVID-19 pandemic are heavy users of transit. In fact, 36% of transit riders are now considered essential workers. So whereas in the past, we've always seen a lot of people have acted like transit is something extra, I like to point out that it's really no good for me to be able to drive myself to the hospital for treatment I can't get because the people who treat me, like nurses and techs, can't get there without transit. And what's exciting is what an incredible amount of support we have seen, particularly on Capitol Hill, on both sides of the Hill, the Senate and the House, and both sides of the aisle for transit operating support. My organization was able to lead an effort to get $25 billion in operating support in what's known as the CARES Act. And we've been pushing for some additional, and what the House has introduced this week has a little over 11 billion additional dollars, which is the first time there has been broad-based support for transit operations at the federal level ever. Something else that's been exposed is how little area is reserved in our public spaces for people, particularly on our roadways. A lot of areas have no sidewalk, and where they do have a sidewalk, there aren't 6 feet to separate people so that they can be outside and healthy. What's particularly important about this is we know being outside and active is associated with better immunity, and you are less likely to develop pneumonia if you are someone who is able to be outdoors and active. But especially for people that don't have big backyards or big homes, being outdoors is just essential for all kinds of health reasons, not least of which is mental health. You just need some space. And we are seeing cities across the country do extraordinary work to open up their roadways to people. And I will say that a lot of these cities are looking to make these changes permanent in a lot of cases. They're picking these roads strategically. So Oakland, California has opened over 74, it's actually higher now, 74 miles of streets for pedestrians and cyclists. Burlington, Vermont opened or modified 23% of their city roadways to make more space for people. This is just a collection of others that have done something. We got Denver, Minneapolis, Burlington, Louisville, Kentucky, Boston, Seattle, Traverse City, Madison, Wisconsin. And I've recently heard reports that, I know New York City, Portland, San Francisco, Hoboken, DC, Alameda, Providence, and Sacramento have all followed suit. But I also have heard that Salt Lake City and Milwaukee and dozens of other cities are considering the same thing. So moving into a conversation about opportunities for a green and equitable recovery, we produced a report that was about the lessons we learned from the 2009 Recovery Act. And there's a heavy dose of Beth Osborne in that, because I was on Capitol Hill in the Senate, and my former boss, Tom Carper from Delaware, was a part of the group that negotiated the Recovery Act that was eventually passed. And then I moved on to USDOT as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy to implement the Recovery Act. And I'd say the two biggest things that we learned from it is that we did not design our spending to accomplish our goal, which was creating and preserving jobs quickly. We just took projects off the shelf that were not created for job support. Might have some job implications, but that was not the purpose of the existing programs. And we put more money into it and hoped that it would then do something it was not designed to do. That did not work. And Congress does really like to just take programs off the shelf and put more money into it. We also didn't prioritize any other long-term outcomes like equity, safety, public health, or climate. We know from analysis of the Recovery Act that transit creates more jobs than roadway projects, and that roadway state of repair creates a lot more jobs than roadway expansion or new roadways, because so much of new roadways and roadway expansions go to right-of-way acquisition, which will make a handful of lawyers very excited for the job opportunity of taking care of land transfer, but is not a big job creator. I would also warn that this conversation about shovel-ready projects is fraught, because what was shovel-ready in January of 2020 was not, it probably wasn't relevant to what we're experiencing right now or what we're likely to experience going forward. Senator McConnell, the majority leader, has already stated he doesn't want to put infrastructure into any COVID-19 relief bill because he doesn't think it's tied to COVID-19. And turning to the projects that were ready before we went into this pandemic proves him right. I'd also say it really doesn't go at addressing what we need today or any of these priorities of job creation, equity, climate, safety, because COVID-19 has shown that that's not what the program delivers. So shovel ready is something that we should greet with some caution and maybe reevaluate projects for whether or not they address these priorities. I'd also say we may not want something that involves a shovel. We may not need to do capital. We may need to do operations improvements. We may need to do painting or redesign, and that could be just as important as turning dirt. We need to support transit and more space for people. And we really need to provide resources to do a better job of identifying need and evaluating projects based on these priorities. And there are those tools out there. I'm going to finish up with some very specific recommendations for Hawaii. Hawaii might want to reconsider its transportation plan that has been analyzed to show that it will increase driving by 11%. Increasing driving by 11% is going to have big short-term greenhouse gas emission impacts. It also, in focusing on driving, is inherently inequitable because the people with the least are the least likely to be able to drive. And so we really need to think about both the equity of continually focusing on driving, which is going, like I said earlier, goes through neighborhoods, often poor neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color, and it continues to expose them to fine particles and other things that make them more vulnerable to health problems. We should evaluate all transportation projects and plans for its impact on vehicle miles traveled, driving, and greenhouse gas emissions. The state of Hawaii could make alternative transportation a funding and design priority. It's really not enough just to do the funding. We have to design our roadways for something other than fast car travel. The state of Hawaii could move up the obligation of millions of unused bike ped infrastructure funds, which the state is in jeopardy of losing later this year because it hasn't moved those dollars to create the space for people so they can be out and at a distance, which we're going to have to do for 18 to 24 months at least. And last, Hawaii is invested in some really forward-thinking, exciting tools that it's not putting to work on land use and transportation decision-making to really evaluate how many jobs and services people have access to. And it could make that a bigger priority. So I will just finish up by saying that we at Tea for America do a lot of work in these areas. We have a lot of studies and analyses already out, but stay tuned because we're going to have a explainer on how land use and transportation impact greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to have a climate and transportation agenda out that can be applied at the federal and state level. And we're going to have a report out very soon comparing states and their performance on managing vehicle miles traveled and travel demand. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was a very interesting and very timely presentation as we think through like what are the best capital and operating projects to move forward on in the recovery. Let's have a little bit of time for questions and comments. Lynn.
I'd like to, if possible, schedule a meeting with you with my to include, you know, some of my transportation deputy director for highways and maybe some of his key managers, as well as the director, maybe another like Zoom meeting or Teams meeting if possible. So if we could connect after this meeting, I would greatly appreciate it. I'll get your contact info from Anu, but I'd like to, yeah, I'd like to just discuss like how you arrived at certain conclusions and just kind of get, you know, Highways Division's response on that. Thank you.
I guess I have
Thanks,
a quick
Beth.
question just to clarify, and there's a lot of people besides us listening and watching right now. I think that when you say the state needs to do this or the state needs to do that, that you're not necessarily differentiating between what is state and what is county. You're saying state and or county. Is that correct? Or did you look into like which projects fall under which entity's jurisdiction when you put together this presentation?
I'm much more focused on the state right now, though I understand that there's dynamics between the states and the counties, and the state is very supportive of county priorities. So some of the things that may have ended up in a state plan could be county promoted.
Right, but did you take time to look into some of the things that you mentioned, like whether they were even under the state's jurisdiction in the state of Hawaii or under county? Because we do operate like independently to a degree.
Yeah, when I was talking about the state transportation plan, I was focusing on HDOT's plan.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure thing.
Other questions, comments? Okay, two good comments. Obviously, we have representation from the State Department of Transportation. Lynn, thank you for that comment. And Rep. Lowen, thank you for pointing out the differences between what the state is lead on and what the counties are lead on. That's an important distinction. If there are no further questions, comments, Beth, thank you so much for your presentation and for, you know, some good thought-provoking insight into how we can best push these priorities forward.
Thank you for having me and your leadership on this issue.
Okay, thanks so much. Anu, you want to introduce our third presenter?
Sure, thank you. So we looked at a new UH report that was released yesterday, which is titled Do No Harm, How Hawaii State Government Can Mitigate the COVID-19 Economic Crisis. And it recommends against any cuts to state spending in the middle of the emergency. Co-author Dr. Robert Perkinson says, we don't need to pile a government sector crisis atop a private sector recession. Hawaii can do better. So with that, I invite our final speaker, Beth Geisting, Director of Hawaii Budget and Policy Center. She will fill us in on how Hawaii can get out of this Penn session with green jobs and smart investment in infrastructure. Welcome, Beth, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. And I am also going to share with you some economic equity data that I think is going to be useful to all of us as we are thinking about what the future should hold and trying to make it a better place for all of us. So let me see if I can manage to share my screen here. Sorry about that. There we go. I think that works. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we
Okay.
can see it.
Thank you. So today I wanted to first introduce myself. My name is Beth Giesting. I'm the director of the Hawaii Budget and Policy Center, which is a new organization, but it's really a project of Hawaii Appleseed. Hawaii Appleseed is a nonprofit. Its focus is on economic and social justice. And our role in Hawaii Appleseed is to do research, looking at the facts behind our budget, tax, and other policies and their effects on low to middle income people in our community. So looking at economic systems, obviously you know very well that our economic system has not been very good for the environment. We typically look at income and wealth inequity. And I really appreciated what Beth Osborne had to say about the design of highways is behind the increase in speeding, because we have designed what we have created. And for equity issues, it's really about policy design. So I wanted to quickly run through some slides that I think are really important for us to be thinking about in terms of disparities that we found here in Hawaii, economic disparities that people experience. So we have found that there is significant wage disparity that has grown. We took a look at what people were paid in 1980 compared to 2018. Low wage people have barely seen any increase. Middle wage, same circumstances, and high wages about the same. That matters a lot because of the jobs that we're growing here in Hawaii are low wage jobs. Since 2017, we have seen a big increase in the number of jobs in the hotel and leisure and service areas, and a decrease in the percentage that pay high wages. It's also important to note that almost as many people who work full-time are being paid on an hourly basis as are being paid salary. And this is really important because people who work on an hourly basis have much less security, predictability in their hours, predictability in their income, therefore, and many hourly workers don't enjoy paid benefits either. So this is a trend that is very disturbing as well. Here in multiracial Hawaii, I think that many of us would be surprised to see that white workers still significantly earn more than workers of color. And the wages for white workers has increased more than those of most others. So in this slide, the yellow line is the average. And so you can see where everybody is lined up according to the average pay. Of course, part of that is based on education because there's a strong correlation between education and income. Not surprising that you can see Japanese, white, and Okinawans are much more likely to have a bachelor's degree and also are earning more on a per capita basis. Down at the other end of the scale, Pacific Islanders and Vietnamese and Native Hawaiians particularly are not acquiring a bachelor's degree, not earning much in per capita income. And I think that there are a lot of things behind the failure to ensure that folks like this are able to get a good education, and some of those are family norms and supports and all of that. But it's also important to note that the cost of an education matters a lot too. And so this just traces the funding curve for the University of Hawaii. during the recession, general funds per student were much greater than the amount that students were paying themselves for tuition. And that's really flipped since that time. And I think that we will see a continuing increase in the amount of funding that the students themselves have to come up with. And that is also going to put a damper on the ability of people, particularly people who come from families that have not previously gotten a bachelor's degree, to get a good education and to not take out exorbitant educational loans. Now, besides income, it's also important to take a look at the costs of living. This chart shows, as adjusted to 2018 dollars, rent and food has increased by $8,300 per year. And I really probably should have shown this just as rent and utilities, because those costs alone have increased by more than $8,000 every year. So as you can see, on an annual basis, people in the high income, who earn high income wages, they can cover that easily, but median and low income wage earners are not able to keep up with the inflation. So we know that rent and food are not the only expenses that people are having to support. I have not done a lot of research in childcare, but I do know that the cost of childcare can take up at least half of the wages of a low-income single parent. But it's also a matter of our policy about who pays how much in taxes. And I think that it might be surprising for some people to see that lower income people pay considerably more of their income toward taxes than higher income people do. And I want to emphasize that this is as a percentage of their income. So it doesn't mean that low income people pay the most dollar amount in taxes, but they are paying a lot of their income toward taxes. And that's largely because of our general excise tax dependence, because low income households spend virtually everything they bring in, and virtually everything they spend money on is subject to the general excise tax. And then I would like to share with you this one shot of the Financial Health in Hawaii survey. This came out earlier this year based on survey results from last year. I'm quite sure that this will have changed significantly in the months to come. But in this survey, they found that only 31% of households in Hawaii were financially healthy. That is, they were routinely earning more than they spent. They had savings both for long-term needs like retirement and also for short-term emergencies. And they had insurance and a plan. Most people were coping, which meant that they were usually, but not always, earning more than they spent. And struggling on a regular basis. And then 15% were just totally vulnerable and were not able to make their expenses and had no savings. And then finally, just to take a look at the distribution of wealth in our country. So this isn't Hawaii, but this is the United States. And this shows how that has changed between 1989 and 2016. And you can see that the top 10% of households have continued to increase the share of wealth that they have possession of. It certainly illustrates the adage that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And that is a matter of policy as well. And in fact, public policy does matter. Federal tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations in 2017 have helped continue that trajectory of wealth being built up in a few families. And it also, by cutting the amount of money that's available for the public to spend, has put a downward trajectory on public spending, or at least not spending according to what we really need for the environment, mass transit, housing, education and training programs, health and human services, all of the things that we need to be investing in for human development. So to go back to what I think you probably really were most interested in, immediate economic help. One of the things that we did was take a look at what happened during the Great Recession and how the federal government provided funds to Hawaii and all the other states. And economists have taken a look at the results since the recession ended and assessed them for their value. Their economic value, the bang for the buck. So they found for each $1 spent in federal dollars, food stamps was the greatest bang for the buck. $1.71 in economic value for every dollar spent. Work share programs were also high in increasing and expanding and lengthening unemployment benefits, defense spending, which I guess I'm not real sure what they spent money on, so I'm not sure why that is so important. Infrastructure spending was very important. Child tax credits and aid to state governments, which is one of the things that we're still struggling to get Congress to help us out with right now. So in terms of investing in climate infrastructure, I would say that this is a very good time for us to try to make a pitch to increase the investment in climate. Obviously, this is absolutely essential to all of us. So we know the value, but it also can be a stimulus. It's a good time for cheap borrowing. All of the interest rates are very low, and the state can borrow money from the Fed right now for very favorable rates. But investing in the climate, in climate infrastructure is also really important because it provides more work opportunities. Here's an opportunity for capital investments on the part of the state and counties. And we are also talking to various people about whether it's time to talk about creating something like a civilian conservation corps. During the Great Depression, there was the Works Progress Administration, which was an essential lifeline to many people by employing people who otherwise couldn't find jobs. And the WPA and its related Civilian Conservation Corps did so much to build up infrastructure, replant forests, build sidewalks, did a whole lot of things. And if we have a situation where we're looking at long-term unemployment because we will not have tourism coming back anytime soon, we really do need to think about creating something to put people to work in a meaningful way and help them earn money while they're doing things that are important to our community. So these are just some things that we believe are important to consider as we're rebuilding an economy that works better for everybody. Sustainable environment is absolutely essential, but housing, making sure everybody has access to IT infrastructure and devices, allowing everybody to have an opportunity to get the kinds of education and skills training they want, childcare in pre-K, and really looking at helping low-income workers. And now would be a good time to think about what sustainable agriculture would mean to us. So that's it. This is how you can get hold of me. And I would love it if you would go and take a look at our other reports and stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. Let's see, we want to have you. Exit this. Okay. We appreciate your thoughtful comments about how to rebuild an economy in a fair and equitable way, and in a way that is most productive for actually building the economy while addressing climate change issues. So we need to go back to full screen there. We need to exit the share screen. Beth, can you, I think you can exit there we go. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay,
Thank you.
Questions, comments from the commissioners? Okay, I don't have I hear any direct questions for Beth on this. So I guess I would like to just throw it open and see if anybody has any comments generally about really the point of having this meeting was to stimulate everybody's thinking on the how to use this opportunity of this emergency to make sure that we're rebuilding the economy in a way that that we can advance the climate mitigation and adaptation objectives. And I will say DLNR is looking pretty hard at civilian corps job opportunities, looking at federal funding sources for those. I know the legislature is working very hard on both the operating side and the capital side. So anybody have, want to share some thoughts about what are the areas that we could really focus on at this particular time in our economic transition? All right, understanding that the Zoom is a little unusual. Zoom in a live stream is a little unusual for this, so we understand that it's a tough thing. But it looks like Rep. Lowen's getting ready to say something. Let me wait. We got to take you off mute here. Hang on. There you go. Wait, unmute. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
All right, I'm not touching anything. I keep unmuting myself, and then you're doing it at the same time.
Yes.
No, I think we're all busy thinking about these ideas. We're not used to having the conversation in this kind of forum, but I know that we are working on pulling together a list of ideas of how, you know, the issues that relate to the committee I chair can play into economic recovery. Like you mentioned, you know, some kind of looking at a conservation corps. On the energy side, I think investing in energy efficiency projects is, you know, one of the things that we could do right now that has little upfront costs, but could be also a job creator. There's kind of, I think, thinking about it in terms of what can we do right now that doesn't have a lot of upfront costs, and what's a longer term recovery strategy that gets us more to a place of sustainable tourism and economic diversification. And some of those, the challenge with a lot of those proposals is that they will require funding to get started. And because the state is in such a difficult position with the budget already, and we can't really deficit spend besides issuing bonds, that, you know, it would be helpful to have some kind of federal relief, that we had some flexibility in determining how to spend it. But I think that, you know, in the event that that does happen, we have to be thinking ahead and putting everything on the table. And so, you know, we're working on, there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, I think agriculture is an important conversation to have as far as economic diversification goes, and then looking at that in terms of how can we incentivize regenerative agriculture and make sure we're doing it in a way that is, you know, hurting not, or helping not hurting as far as climate emissions go. So there is a lot of opportunity here. It's not as, there's a lot of things that are easy to say but harder to do. And I think everybody's probably been thinking about this and working on it and on their own as well. So we'll hopefully all get a chance to talk in more comfortable surroundings at some point also.
Thank you for that. And I agree. Sorry, my very highly energy efficient light goes off automatically if I don't move. Your point about agriculture being an important part of this, I think is really right on. Maybe Brian has some thoughts on it. But the way, it's a good example of how interconnected this is, because you know, in a devastated economy with shipping constrictions and effects on agricultural production elsewhere, making it more important than ever for us to support our local agriculture and buy locally agriculture. I mean, that's a climate issue right there, because that will reduce our carbon emissions from shipping into Hawaii, as well as be an important economic driver and a way to rebuild our economy. Anybody else have any comments? Okay, hearing none. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Myers, and then Mr. Freed.
Yeah, so this is Luke from HIEMA. Obviously, we've been up to our eyeballs with COVID, but one of the things that we were considering from a larger hazard mitigation perspective that could be an opportunity with some of the COVID funds that tie to overall kind of climate resilience is a concept that we've been pushing is this resilient house. And so as we look to structurally try to reinforce homes throughout the island, specifically those that are low income or economically disadvantaged, a number of business partners have come to the table in the state EOC here in the last 70 days, big business, small business, and with this resilient house concept, every house should have a solar roof, and every house should be hurricane strapped. And so we're trying to think about potential financial resources that would be available coming from COVID that would actually make an implementation at the most fundamental level of an individual versus maybe a big business or a corporation. So it's something that we're looking at from a larger hazard mitigation perspective that may help support the larger climate resiliency.
That's a great point, integrating both resilience to hurricanes and opportunities for solar energy for all as economic recovery projects. That's a great point. Mr. Freed.
Yes, thanks so much, Chair. As Rep. Lowen said, and I think Lynn knows very well, the focus, and I'll make this quite brief, in the last year at the Tourism Authority, of which I'm still chair, is really focusing on this sustainable tourism. And this happened way before the COVID-19. And I think we're now going to have to do, which we've seen emphasize in other places, is try to focus specifically on maybe a different type of tourist. It'll be at a lower number. I agree with many people that say 10 million is just too many people. It's making it difficult on the residents. However, right now, I'll bet if you ask people what you think of tourism, it'd be pretty good because of our mammoth unemployment, which is the highest in the nation. So we have been focusing for at least a year, if not more, on the sustainable aspect of tourism, which I think benefits certainly the residents and those tourists that are interested in that, I think are ones we should focus on. Thanks.
Very good point. And I know tourism is obviously got pluses and minuses, and we're all acutely aware of them right now. And interestingly, from the DLNR standpoint, you know, and I think everybody's hearing a lot of reports about areas where the environment's getting a break because we don't have the tourists right now. We have reports of dolphins coming in close into shore in their bays where they're in resting areas, and pupping and in areas where they're less afraid because there's fewer people, and waters are clearer. Heard reports of waters clearer, no doubt. Good resilience from coral bleaching with fewer people walking on reefs, and that from the DLNR perspective, it's interesting to us because there are still a lot of local residents out there enjoying our Hawaii's environment, and so these impacts are both from tourists and residents. And it's an important part of the sort of equation to figure out how to balance those impacts. One of the key areas that we have, opportunities we have for addressing climate change in an economic recovery is simply by planting trees. And we can plant trees up in the forest and soak up a lot of carbon. We can plant trees in urban areas and cool our urban areas. And to the extent that we have federal, especially dollars, as well as state dollars on the operating side to create jobs in the economic recovery that have climate benefits like soaking up carbon and cooling our cities. Those are great opportunities for us to take a hard look at and really try to put those kind of projects into play. Other comments?
Chair, could I just mention that I've got some requests for these slides that the presenters presented, and we'll be putting them on our website, on your commission's website, climate.hawaii.gov/commission.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, I think we can conclude our meeting. We're going to go to our last agenda item. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Mary Alice Evans, to announce the next agenda and also for approval of the minutes from the prior meeting. Wait, you're still on mute. Wait. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Because Zoom makes it a little bit more difficult to do roll call votes, I'm going to suggest that we ask if there are any changes or additions or deletions to the minutes of, we have two sets that you have received. One is our January meeting, which is very short, and the other is our November meeting, which is a longer set of minutes. Let's take January first. Are there any objections? If I don't see a hand raised or hear objections, we'll deem the minutes adopted unanimously. Any thoughts, additions, deletions, objections? Seeing none, the January minutes are adopted. The November minutes, are there any additions, deletions, objections? Seeing none, the November minutes are adopted unanimously. I wanted to make a short announcement about the tentative agenda for the July 15th meeting coming up, which we may be by Zoom, but maybe by that time we'll be able to gather with careful physical distancing and possibly masks and other preventive health preventive, actually not health, COVID preventive measures. We hope to hear from the state's chief energy officer, Scott Glenn. Oh, very good, Suzanne, demonstrating on the impact of renewable energy on climate change. And in this era of COVID, what he has been working on with his partners and colleagues. And we also hope to have a presentation by Cole Roberts on sea level rise adaptations that can be made in Hawaii in areas where the public infrastructure is too expensive or difficult to move easily. An adaptation may be the best public policy going forward over the decades to come. So that, Chair, that concludes that announcement.
Thank you very much. All right, with that, that brings us to the end of this meeting. I hope we will all take this inspiration and tackle our economic recovery with full climate focus in all aspects. We will look forward to working with all of you in your various capacities and appreciate very much your time today and your service on the Climate Commission, and appreciate the members of the public who submitted testimony and your continuing thoughts as well. With that, that concludes the May 13, 2020 meeting of the State Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission at 2:42 p.m. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.